Hi there, this is Andre, and today in response to a question that I received from Mr. Skeleton1, I think is his username on YouTube, I will talk about effects loop on amplifiers. First of all, the first rule is that you do not need to use the effects loop. Some great old amps didn't have effects loop and they sound great, and you can use your delay pedals and you can use your chorus in front of the amp and it's no problem at all. But they are very useful devices on amplifiers. And the basic idea is that it allows you to decide what goes in front of the amp, which means in front of the preamp part of your amplifier, and what goes after the fact, which means going between your preamp and your power amp. Okay, so that's the basic idea of an effects loop. The confusion comes probably from the fact that instead of having inputs and outputs, they're called returns and sends. Now, a send is nothing but an output, and a return is an input. As a matter of fact, let's get this out of the way already. One trick that you can use if you're using, for example, a pod or any kind of amp simulation device, one trick that some people use when they, for example, if you go rehearsing and you don't want to carry your amp and stuff, one trick is to have your sounds on a pod, for example, and then when you get there, you plug the guitar into the pod and the pod goes into the return of the amp. That way you won't have two preamps in series, because otherwise you have the preamp on the pod and the preamp on the amp, and that will add stages of distortion and of gain, and we don't want to get into that. And so what you can do is have the preamp section in the pod, and then the output of the pod goes into the return of the amp. That way you kind of bypass the whole preamp section. Okay, I used many years ago when I used the pod. That's what I used to do for rehearsing. It was much easier than carrying your amp around. Okay, so that's one trick. Anyway, the main idea is that sometimes you don't want effects to come before the preamp. So say, for example, you have your guitar and your wah and your distortion pedals and maybe a little boost or an overdrive, and you want this kind of effects to interact with the preamp, with the gain stage. So you want your wah to generate a bit more distortion. You want your overdrive pedal to give you more sustain. You want all these interactions with the preamp. But say that now you want to add a delay pedal. So maybe you don't want the delay to go into the amp and then the delay signal being affected by the preamp. So if you have distortion, if you have EQ on your preamp, then it will affect the pedal before it reaches the power amp. Okay? So one trick is to actually use the effects loop. And this works for pedals, or it works for if you have a rec unit, for your echoes and reverbs and all that stuff, you can use that in the loop as well. So the idea is most effects that are time-based, and some people disagree, I mean choruses, I have one in front and one in the loop, but usually your time-based effects and your modulation effects, you want them in the loop because they will sound purer that way, because they won't be affected by the preamp, which is where your gain and distortion and all the weird EQing stuff happens. Okay, so say for example you have your guitar, your pedals, you go into the preamp, and then you decide to add a delay pedal and a chorus in your effects loop. As a matter of fact, I have an older video, which my pedal board has changed a bit since then, but you can still check it out. I post a link here, and you can see how I have it set up. And so you have your delay and your chorus, and when you engage them, what happens is the signal is already made. I mean, the sound is done. You have your pedals, and you have your preamp, and you have your EQ on the amp, so that's done. Now that signal gets delayed, or it gets a chorus. Okay, so the delay and the chorus and all those other time-based effects work with the signal that is already made. If you had it before, then it would affect the signal before you get to the end stage. Alright, so it's actually simpler than it sounds. And from there, then you can go to the power amp section, and off you go. One more thing that you should know is there are two main types of effects loop, serial and parallel. Serial are very common, and usually once you plug something in the send and return, it's in. So if you want to change the way, or bypass, or change the way the balance between the effect and the dry signal, you have to do it from the unit itself, because the serial loop puts the effect device inside the signal, so there's no way out. You have your guitar, your pedals, your amp, your preamp, the loop, and the power amp. There's no way to take it out. A parallel loop actually splits the signal into two parts and will bring a dry signal, just your guitar sound with, of course, all the preamp information, straight to the power amp. And then on top of that, you will have another parallel, that's why it's called parallel, signal that goes also to the power amp, but without touching the first one, without affecting it. And usually these loops come with a knob that's called the mix knob. And you can go from real low, which basically will only give you the straight signal, to all wet, which will only give you the affected signal. And so somewhere in there you'll find a balance between the two sounds. What else? I think that's it. I think this is all for today. And by the way, check out that video. I post the link again, and so you can see the sounds of all this stuff that we talked about. Alright, so I'll see you next week for some more guitar playing. Bye bye.